you set out to study the brain, shortly you realize how complex of a system it is. Not only are there different types of neurons, but there are also different types of neural networks, not to mention different types of brainwaves, aka neural oscillations. And so there's a slew of interactions both at the chemical, biological, as well as electrical levels that is happening within our brain all the time. And so as a result of all these chemical and biological reactions, each neurons can also have a different polarity to it. And that is also other types or functionalities that the neurons For example, a neuron can be bipolar, multipolar, or unipolar. There are also many types to the neurons. For example, we have sensory neurons, or we have motor neurons, interneurons, and so forth. And so knowing all these, it's quite natural to understand why science and scientific research is so slow, because there is a lot that we need to unpack. And before even doing that, we need to go through a lot of rigorous scientific processes, because you need to set up the experiment, you need to know what the current body of literature is saying, you need to be able to defend that and discuss that, and also justify the experimental design that you decide upon in order to do your study. And so there's also a lot of different topics about the brain that scientists want to discover and want to study. One of them, which is huge enigma still to many of us, is the learning mechanism, aka the plasticity of the neurons, because as we learn, the neurons make new connections, the neural networks might change in type. In addition, the also oscillations, the brain waves appear to change. So this is obviously a huge topic that has been under investigation of scientists for many, many years. And so one of the major enigmatic question is what happens at the cellular, at the neural and the physiological level when, for example, we learn, when we create new path of neurons, aka the plasticity of the brain. While we have decades of research in this field, there are still specific areas that is poorly understood. Hence, there are many scientists in this field that are still conducting their studies and publishing papers, etc. And for today, we're going to cover one of them that was published most recently from universities in Berlin. And one of the major questions of this study was that what happens at the cellular level when this plasticity is long-term, aka when we learn a topic, but it's not short-term, it's long-term. That is when we are calling it a learning mechanism. In particular, when it comes to hippocampus and learning, there has been evidence and suggestions that gamma oscillations, gamma brainwaves activities have a lot to do with it, because the activities appear to increase. In other words, it appears that the hippocampal gamma brainwaves activities induces plasticity, which is associated with synaptic plasticity within distinct type of neuron. In this study, these scientists present a general mechanism of plasticity specific to hippocampal wave frequency, where gamma wave frequencies increased when subjects were repeatedly exposed to stimuli. It's worth mentioning that for this particular study, the subjects were mice. They were not humans, which is quite normal in experimental studies where you need to go much lower in measuring the brainwaves activities, so-called LFP, because you do need to use surgical procedures to implant these sensors. Now, one of the findings of this study was that when the subjects were exposed repeatedly to these stimuli, in turn, the long-lasting plasticity or learning was also induced. And here's also where neural network activity in gamma frequencies were invoked. What does this all mean? This study appears to have taken the first step into experimenting and showing that we can identify the cell type specific plasticity of gamma waves. In other words, there appears to be a organized communication, collaboration between the neurons, neuron-specific types, and neural oscillation specific or wave frequency specific that happens within the brain. Now, obviously, this is one of those first steps. We have learned a lot over the past decades, but we still have a lot to learn. Hence the reason science and scientific research moves very slowly forward, because you do need to be very rigorous in terms of conducting your studies, and you also get scrutinized a lot within the community, scientific community, before you can even get published, for those who even get published.